All right. Can everybody hear me out there? All right. Thank you, Don. As Don said, my name's Cody Rakes, and I'm talking to you about the Loretta Mother House Farm, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. So here it says Meet the Rakeses. This is a picture of my wife and I and our dog Rascal. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but as you can see there, it says we're expecting more than baby calves this spring. Baby Rakes due March of 18. So I'm going to be a dad come March. So that's first and foremost. I want to tell you about that and tell you about my family. So it's my wife Angela. We met in high school and went through college together. But I'll tell you a little bit more about me specifically. My degree was in agriculture education from the University of Kentucky. Graduated from there in the spring of 2015. In October of 2015, I was actually hired at the Loretta Mother House Farm. Well, you can see Rascal there, the border collie in the front. He's kind of the farm mascot. I'll tell you more about that as well. I have a passion for learning and a passion for agriculture. So the two of those combined so that I have a passion for learning about agriculture and I guess for talking about it and being involved in these kind of things as well. So if you look in the top left corner up there, you see the little arrow. Well, that's Lexington. If you look down here at the bottom right-hand corner, you see a little star there. That's Nerinx, Kentucky. So this area right here is Marion County, and Nerinx is in the very northwest corner of Marion County. You've probably never heard of Nerinx because we are our own town. Nerinx is an unincorporated community. It's home to the Sisters of Loretto, which is a convent of Catholic nuns. We've got our own post office there, so that's how we get our own town. And they have been there since 1824. So this is an old property that's been operated by the same group for quite a number of years. The farm is about 789 acres. There's about 300 of those acres in woodlands. 85 acres that were formerly grain production acres that have been converted to wildlife area, pollinator habitat. So they've got native grasses, pollinators, wildflowers, those kinds of things. We've got about 175 acres of row crops, about 190 acres of pasture and hay, 22 acres of lakes and ponds. This yellow outline is the outline of the farm. There's a Highway 49 goes right here, and then there's Highway 152 that borders the farm across the front. So we go from highway to highway and just a little bit on the other side. You can see the couple of lakes there. This is the campus area right here. So these are the convent buildings, the nursing home. There's 2 retreat centers on campus. There's some cabins back in the woods where you can come and spend time on retreat. But the farm kind of surrounds all of that, and all of that activity is going on there in the middle of the farm. So it's a different kind of place to be. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of our farm objectives. I know this conference is about forages, but forages is a main component of the farm, but got a lot of other things that are going on as well, and all of those things are kind of integrated. So some of the farm objectives, number one is integration of the crop and livestock systems. So like I said, I've got about 175 acres of crops, got about 190 acres of pasture and hay, and trying to figure out how those two systems can work with one another and moving them away from being mutually exclusive to where these are crop acres, these are cattle, pasture, hay acres, to where that they are a mutually beneficial system, to where grazing cover crops, using the manure back on the crop fields, those kind of things. We'll talk about that as we go throughout the presentation. Expansion and improvement of the livestock systems. So growing the cattle herd. When I started there were very few cattle. I've been working on growing the cattle herd. Also defining best management practices and implementing those best management practices. And third, which is very important for a lot of the different things that goes on because this takes a lot of time, is to become a center for education. The sisters, when they were in the process of finding someone for my position, they did a lot of soul searching and tried to define what they wanted the farm to be. And they decided they wanted it to be a center for education. And not just helping farmers and teaching farmers about farming practices, but also for teaching people about agriculture. The people that live there, the sisters that have called that place home for many years, helping them to understand what's going on the farm as well. So that's how I came to become part of this whole program. Raise your hand if you know who your stakeholders are in making decisions on your farm. Okay, a few of us do. Well, this group right here are my stakeholders. And they're my stakeholders because they're the farm owners. Those are the Sisters of Loretta, the ones that currently reside on the farm, at the nursing home and in the convent. They're also my stakeholders because those are the majority of my consumers. The beef that I raise off the farm goes into the kitchen to feed these folks. So these are my stakeholders. This is I was giving a presentation to them a couple months ago, kind of do this quarterly, just to let them know what all was going on the farm, those kind of things. So the first goal, integration of the crop and livestock systems. Like I said, there's about 175 acres of row crops. These are all non-GMO. That was a decision that the sisters made. And it kind of functions where they make, there's a committee, a farm and land committee that makes sort of overlying goals. They made the decision that they want all the crops to be non-GMO. They made the decision that they want the beef to be produced in a grass-fed, grass-finished protocol. Those are two of the main decisions that they've made, and then I have the day-to-day operations. I make those decisions on a day-to-day basis. So integration of the crop and livestock systems, integrating that corn and soybean rotation. So I've got the crops in a corn and soybean rotation. Everything is no-tilled, and it has been no-tilled for 10-plus years. And this is all non-irrigated, upland-type production. So I'm investigating a couple different things. Number one, utilizing cover crops for hay. You can see, you might be able to make it out, that picture there. That's wrapping some hay. That was actually a winter cover crop that I cut off and harvested that and wrapped that for hay. So that's how I'm utilizing. One of the speakers earlier was talking about that solar panel, utilizing that solar panel most effectively. So I'm utilizing these crop fields 365 days a year, and I do that by implementing these forages. I'm also looking at using the cover crops for grazing. So these cover crops that I'm planting following the harvest of that cash crop, that grain crop, using that for grazing. So that's what's going on here in this picture down here. Planting the cover crops. So I've worked with the local Young Farmers Association to do some test plots to figure out which different species are going to improve things better. Looking at which ones work best for improving gains on the cattle. I've got too many things going on to tell you all about today. But finally, if I'm not going to utilize that forage that's growing, utilizing that as an improvement for the soil, leaving it standing. So I had several acres this year that I wound up not cutting it for hay. I'm not going to go through the trouble of cutting and harvesting the hay if I'm not going to be able to utilize it. So I didn't want to have it just sitting there not being utilized. So I'm utilizing it by leaving it in the field. So I planted some of my crops green this year, which is basically planting your grain crop into that standing cover crop. And then I terminated that with a herbicide shortly thereafter planting. So integrating that whole system to really improve it. So I talked about using the cover crops for haying and grazing. I used 20 acres of wheat, crimson clover, hairy vetch, and Austrian winter peas. That was a big program, a big project I had this past time. Wrapped that for baleage. Lots of different things going on. Try to integrate those two systems so that they're mutually beneficial. Next is expansion and improvement of the livestock system. So I've got about 190 acres of pasture and hay. About 50 of those acres are currently fenced and are fenced well enough to be able to use for grazing. There's about 15 acres that are they're not contiguous to other fenced acres, so they're pretty much designated for hay only. And then the rest of those acres have fence, but it's 30-plus-year-old fence that hasn't been managed well. And I don't want to chase cattle all the time, so I haven't currently been utilizing those for grazing. As the herd continues to grow, I will need those pasture acres, so that's why one of the big things that I've been working on is fencing. Replacing fencing, improving those fences so that those acres can be used for pasture. The majority of those acres are not suitable for getting equipment on them to harvest those for hay. So currently those fields are being really left for fallow and getting a really good rest period. I do produce my own hay, but as I said earlier, I produce as little hay as I need in order to get through. I really focus on trying to extend grazing, using annual forages to fill in different forage gaps. But it really is mainly a learning process, trying to learn how all these different things fit in together and mesh with one another, and trying to find where those gaps are. I'm currently in a forage gap right now, coming off of summer annuals and getting into grazing stockpile fescue. So I've still got niches in the system that I need to figure out in order to keep these finishing steers on fresh grazing forage 365 days a year. Testing hay for nutrient value, that's something that hadn't been done on the farm before I got there. And as you all well know, if you're in the beef cattle business or any kind of livestock, or if you're selling hay, that nutrient value is really what you're after. So that's something that I've implemented as well. So this operation is a birth to steak operation. At this point, all of the animals that I'm producing, all the offspring, they're either going into the finishing program, or if they are females that meet the criteria, they're going back to be replacement cows. I've been utilizing stockpile fescue, doing some weed management. There was a lot of overgrazing that had occurred on the farm that I'm trying to utilize rest periods to try to recoup those fields and get them in better condition. So finally, serving as a center for education. Since March of this year, I have hosted over 1,100 individuals for some kind of an educational program. These educational programs have ranged from Head Start students to nursing home residents, and from full-time farmers all the way to vegan city folks. So I've got the whole gamut of individuals coming through and learning about the agricultural practices there on the farm. I've had multiple on-farm field days. So there's Dr. J.D. Green there. He was there along with Dr. Henning. He was running around here earlier. Dr. Henning and J.D. Green were there during National Forage Week. It wound up being. I didn't realize till afterwards. But during National Forage Week, we had a field day there at the farm. You can see some of the participants here with the steers in the background. We were learning about how to manage those pasture weeds and how to manage your pastures for optimal production. So that was one of the field days we had. We had about 45 local farmers show up for that particular field day, and then fed them hamburgers that were raised there on the farm. I've had other field days. We had a cattle breeding and synchronization field day, ultrasounding cattle, had a field day on creating a hub with Dr. Steve Higgins. If you've ever been to any of his programs, he did a lot of work there at the farm with me to try to improve some of the facilities. So we've had a lot of different field days. Had 200 Boy Scouts come and spend a weekend there on the farm, learn about grain crops, learn about beef cattle, just trying to get them exposed to agriculture. So I mentioned earlier, Rascal, you can see him there. He's kind of the mascot of the farm. And the reason for that is the Facebook page. So I've got a Facebook page that I run through the farm. Well, I shouldn't say I run it. Rascal runs the Facebook page. If you're a Facebook user, I encourage you to go and like the Facebook page. For example, last night, Rascal was telling about bringing the steers back out and putting them on some pearl millet that I've got going to finish the pearl millet off for the year. This will probably be the last grazing that I'll get out of it. So Rascal was telling people about using the steers to graze that pearl millet out. And one of the followers actually commented on it and says, "Thanks, Rascal, for letting me know about that. I had never thought about the animals being a harvesting tool." And so that was kind of Dr. Pete at FFA camp would always talk about warm fuzzies. So that was kind of a warm fuzzy to see that people actually are engaged with these programs and are learning, and hopefully somewhere along the line I'm doing things a little bit better than maybe they were in the past. So I'll be the first to admit that I'm learning in this whole process. I've learned a lot today about weed management, and quite honestly, I'm a little discouraged because now I realize I've got a lot of work ahead of me trying to get these weeds under control. I already realized that. I just realized now that there's more weeds than I thought there were, and trying to decide whether they're forbs or not, right? So again, you can like the Facebook page. Here's the link here, facebook.com/motherhousefarm/. You see the black and white border collie. you know you're in the right place. So Rascal makes a post usually about once a day, and he keeps people pretty entertained. We've got over 500 daily followers, and his average daily reach is over 700 individuals. So he's done a pretty good job. The trade secret, I know some of you are wondering how Rascal does the Facebook page. He has a really hard time with the keyboard, and he can't use the phone, so he tells my wife or I, and we type it up for him. So that's the trade secret. Probably good on my time. I think at this point I can ask for questions.
Any questions for Cody?
Back in the back. Have I grazed any of the crop stubble? Up to this point I have not, and the reason for that is that I haven't had any of my crop acres fenced to at the point in which I could graze the crop stubble. Those acres weren't fenced off. But I now have some acreage that is fenced off, and I won't graze the crop stubble this year, but because it's in soybeans. Next year it's in corn. I probably will look into grazing some of that crop stubble. Yes. So no, I haven't at this point, but I will look at that in the future. Other questions?
Let's give Cody a round of applause.
Thank you.